say for the sake of argument, there's this guy. This just real abomination, total scum-sucking garbage hole, who's running for president. And conservative politicians, pundits, and voters have been laughing their asses off about him. Oh my God, he is such a disaster. He'll never get the nomination, and if he were to get the nomination, no one would ever elect him. They trot him out as a punchline. But November 8 draws nearer and nearer, and he's still not out of the game. And the left is banging on the walls like, hey, that joke you're giving free press to is saying some pretty scary stuff. And the right is like, look, don't waste your breath. We've already accepted that we lost this one. We're certainly not going to bat for this guy, so he's going to lose. And then at the last second, when they do go to bat for him, and he does win, and the left is like, what the absolute heck, my dudes? They go, can't do anything about it now. He's the president. And when, 4 years later, you finally get his ass out of office, the left turns to the right and says, okay, now that he's not president, are you going to acknowledge all the stuff he did? You know, the stuff he said he was going to do, that we warned you he was going to do, and you said we were delusional for thinking he would do, that he did? And they're like, oh my God, Heather, he's not even president anymore? How are you still talking about this? I call this one the slow breakup. It's like when your partner starts canceling date nights and then starts getting home really late and then starts sleeping on the couch, and you keep asking, hey, is there something wrong? And they just say, oh, sweetie, of course not. Work is just running me ragged lately, and when I have time off, I'm too tired to go out, and I get home so late these days, I don't want to wake you up by coming to bed. And then one day you get home and their bags are packed, and they're like, look, we both saw this coming. You know that thing. You know this happens to everybody, right? It's always...
Nein, ist mir noch nicht passiert, aber ich sehe sowas auch coming. Und dann reagiere ich schon vorher. Aber das passiert natürlich zum Beispiel mit dem Klimawandel jetzt, ne? Die Rechten werden irgendwann sagen, ey, wir können es nicht mehr ändern, jetzt müssen wir auf jeden Fall Klimafaschismus machen. Wir haben keine Wahl. Wir müssen jetzt erstmal 80% der Weltbevölkerung töten. Das wird was bringen.
Not
Aber solange werden sie sagen, der Klimawandel ist nicht da.
The moment is skipped over where they would acknowledge they misled you, take responsibility for what's happened, or critically, where you could still do something about it.
Genau.
You peel your eyes for this one, you'll see it a lot. This is how conservatives jumped straight from climate change isn't happening to climate change isn't man-made. And now some are trying to jump to maybe it's a good thing. Rhetorically, all these arguments mean the same thing. We decided long ago what we were going to do. Nothing you say will change our course. Mm-hmm. This conversation is over.
The slow breakup.
Say for the sake of argument, you're 12 or 13, it's the mid-90s, and you're sitting across the table from your conservative aunt at a family reunion. This aunt will, a decade from now, become a Tea Partier. And you sweet, innocent child, brought up the subject of evolution, being too young to know it's politicized. And your aunt has not taken well to it. She goes on one of her classic tirades, dismissing the very concept of evolution as patently ridiculous, dropping a quote that will stick with you for ages. You can't get snakes from chicken eggs. And you do your best to explain with your limited knowledge base that, yeah, you can only get a snake from a snake egg, but that snake is going to be a little different from its parents, and the next snake will be a little different from its parents, and you multiply that by a few million generations, and you might have something very different from that original snake. Maybe something with legs, or that can breathe underwater, or see better in the dark. And your aunt stares you dead in the eye and repeats, as if you hadn't said anything, you can't get snakes from chicken eggs. So this is an ego-saving maneuver in which a complex truth is rejected in favor of simplicity. Your aunt has a statement which is true, though non sequitur to the argument at hand, and after your explanation of how genetics work on long timelines, she repeats her original statement to herself, and it still feels true. It's the belief that the truth is easily recognized, and that it's always simple, because the world is simple, and if you can't explain it to me like I'm 5, then you're probably wrong or making things up. This heuristic is very hard to argue with. Like, you've heard the same ant claim that the hole in the ozone layer is caused by sunspots. Now, we've talked about the mimetic power of statements that are short, quippy, and wrong, and this is a fine example. You might feel the correct response is a statement that is short, quippy, and correct. But here's the conundrum. The truth is, the hole in the ozone layer is caused by chlorofluorocarbons. Not only is that a more complex sentence, it's a more complex idea. If the ozone hole is caused by sunspots, then it's probably been happening for billions of years. It's not caused by humans, and we don't have to do anything about it. It's reassuring, and tells folks all they need to know without further questions. But the truth of how aerosols deplete ozone is more complex, not least because even without knowing the science of it, it implies there's a problem we should do something about. Ultraviolet light makes CFCs release chlorine into the stratosphere where it bonds with ozone, converting it into oxygen and chlorine monoxide, neither of which do what ozone does to protect us from the sun. There may be people who can explain that more simply than I just did, but there is a floor to how simple the truth can be and still be the truth. Falsehoods don't have that. There is no limit to how simple an idea can be when it doesn't have to conform to reality. You play the game of who's got the simplest argument, liars win every time. You can't get much simpler than sunspots. But if you can convince people that the world is complex, then simplistic explanations across the board become suspect. It might be too late to do that with your aunt, but maybe there's still hope for your cousins. If you're wondering what they do when confronted with something they cannot deny is complicated, well, you did that. You or someone like you took their simple world and overcomplicated it. All the conspiracy theories and finger-pointing and screenshots they'd squiggled MS Paint over, all of that is the story of how you overcomplicated the world. It fills in the gap between the simplicity of the world they believe in and the unambiguous complexity of the one in which we live. And yes, that story is at least as complex as the truth you're trying to tell them. And no, it doesn't make any sense. But that's a detail. Because the moral of that story is incredibly simple. It is this way because some people made it this way, and all the right has to do is take the power back from those people and things will be simple again. This is their version of A Wizard Did It.
Ist ja witzig, diese englischen Sprichworte, ne? Aber ja, na klar. A wizard did it.
Say for the sake of argument, you've been having a knockdown drag-out online with a reactionary for weeks. It's been going long enough that you don't remember how it started or entirely what you're talking about. The argument seems to center around the nation of Israel, but you're fuzzy on what his position on Israel is. He seems to think of it as a religious ethno-state, which he likes, and wants to use as the model for the US. But it's a Jewish ethno-state, and he has a lot of awful things to say about Jews. He also has a lot of awful things to say about you. He's been giving you every incivility you can imagine, and a few you've never heard of since this began. It's not helped by the fact that, while you know your position on ethno-states and anti-Semitism, they're bad, you don't actually know a lot about the history, founding, or government of Israel. So he often catches you out by...
Wobei, wenn man sagt, sie sind bad, dann müsste man es noch begründen, ne? Weil für echte, überzeugte Right-Wingers stimmt das ja gar nicht. Für die ist das ja was Gutes. Beziehungsweise sie haben irgendeine andere Zielfunktion im Hinterkopf, wo sie sagen, dann ist das nicht so schlimm. Ne? Ich finde, man müsste Rechte immer erstmal fragen, was haben sie überhaupt für ein Ziel im Hinterkopf? Was ist ihre Utopie oder so? Worum geht's eigentlich? Und meistens stellt man fest, sie haben gar keine, sondern sie haben nur so ein Gefühl. Ne? Die meinen das ja gar nicht ernst, die haben es ja gar nicht zu Ende gedacht.
Info-dumping and then mocking your ignorance. And he's just so rude and conceited, and you're absolutely desperate to show the guy up, trying to bulk up on history every day before logging on, but then something unexpected happens. All of a sudden, he stops insulting you. He's still saying awful things about everything you've ever claimed to believe, but now it's directed at a them. Liberals, commies, SJWs, what have you. But he's not calling you any of those things. He's treating you like you're smarter than all those limp-wristed leftoids, smart like him, better than them. It's like he sees potential in you, and after weeks of trying to one-up this guy, suddenly having his respect is kinda cool. This is a recruitment technique. This is the outer edge of the onion. It centers around treating a person badly so they fixate their attention on you, seek some kind of recognition, and maybe have their confidence.
Ja. Also, das machen ja garantiert die Boys so, um sich, also die Groma jetzt, ne? Um sich Prostituierte ranzufarmen in der 9. Klasse oder so.
Undermined. And then turning around and treating them very well. The nearest analog is actually pickup artist techniques like negging and love bombing. If anyone does this to you, understand. You are being groomed.
Ja, genau. Genau.
Say for the sake of argument, you and some other folks have gotten embroiled in a debate about the use of content warnings. One side has put forth the usual case. Some people have trauma or anxiety disorders, and giving them a heads up about common triggers lets them make informed decisions about...
Jäger-Teesuppe. Muss man eine Utopie haben, politisch? Nein, ich denke nicht. Ich denke, wenn man eine konkrete Utopie hat, ist man wahrscheinlich schon dem Irrtum irgendwie aufgesessen, dass man was planen kann, so, ne? Wahrscheinlich ist die Herangehensweise zu sagen, ich habe hier eine Utopie, ist wahrscheinlich schon, hat sozusagen diese Hybris, die wir als Menschen ja gerne haben, dass wir mit Fortschritt und Wissenschaft alles beherrschen können oder irgendwie dass Dinge überhaupt planbar sind und dass Kontrolle existiert. Ich argumentiere ja gerne, dass Kontrolle eine Illusion ist, ne? Also, ich würde nicht sagen, dass man eine Utopie haben muss, jetzt. Ja, ideal. Also, Utopien, verstehe mich da nicht falsch, ich meine, das klingt erstmal so, wie man hat was im Hinterkopf, zu dem man vielleicht hinkonvergieren will. Aber je konkreter die Utopie ist, glaube ich, desto nutzloser wird sie. Dann eher so wie das, was du sagst, ne? So Ideale, die man vielleicht gut begründen kann oder so.
How to engage with a piece of media. They aren't always looking to walk out even, just avoid a panic attack by having a few moments to prepare themselves. And this is often better for everyone, as more people can appreciate the work itself, and the discourse doesn't derail into another discussion about whether it should have had a content warning. And then someone from the other side of the debate says, in all seriousness, and I remind you, this is about whether or not people should put a single sentence at the beginning of a video, the start of a game, outside the door of a theater. Can't you just, have your panic attack? I mean, it's not life and death. The discussion quickly and predictably devolves from there into people who have panic attacks trying to explain how miserable they are and how comparatively simple putting up a content warning is, and you realize far too late that this whole conversation is missing the point. Because the it's not life and death crowd, they never claimed that they are more inconvenienced than the person having a panic attack. I mean, content warnings ain't life and death either. They made no attempt to frame this trade-off as fair or justified, only that in the grand scheme of things, it's not so bad. I call this didoing. It's not so bad. Relationship discourse would call it the tolerable level of permanent unhappiness, which is a really powerful phrase, but I came up with didoing, and I'm keeping it. You see didoing everywhere. Be as gay as you want, just don't tell your commanding officer. Be trans if you must, but pee at home. Kink is fine, but keep it out of pride. Drag is whatever, just not in front of children. Being a woman on the internet isn't hard if you're willing to block 70,000 people and just use this service to scrub all your private information from the internet so men have a harder time finding your home address. Yeah, it's $11 a month. What, you can't afford $11 a month? And yes, these are all minimizations. And if you want, you can point that out. You can tell them what it's like to get a Twitter DM threatening to murder your entire family using a quote from Mission Impossible 3. Yeah, he's probably not going to do it, but it can still fuck up your day. The goal is to fuck up your day. but the It's Not Life and Death crowd won't understand. Not because they don't care, but because they don't care enough. But even that is letting them control the conversation. You're trying to stress the pain of a panic attack, the anxiety of a death threat, to emphasize a gulf of iniquity between their experience as a person who does not deal with these things and that of someone who does. As if were the gulf only smaller, it would be not so bad. In this, you have accepted their premise. Did you even catch what the premise was? That it's okay for things to be unfair within a certain tolerance. That some people do and should take extra precaution just to exist in the world alongside the rest of us. That it's okay for others to suffer for the convenience of the normals. Because it's not so bad. This is a bit different from how privilege usually works. The issue with content warnings, really most things people dido over, is that if you are a person with triggers, it means other people can provoke a panic response in you against your will. The severity of that response is frankly immaterial. The point is, they have power over you.
22
and if you're going to operate in this world as equals, you need their word that this power will not be invoked. The usual move for people on the privileged end of a power imbalance is to deny the imbalance exists. White privilege is a myth, there is no gender wage gap, etc., etc., etc. And you would think the greater the imbalance, the harder it is to deny. But it's just the opposite. People dido when the imbalance is small, or at least appears small in the eyes of the didoer. It happens with content warnings, microaggressions. No, you know what? I don't get followed around Macy's like I'm going to steal something. But is that really so important? Is this life and death? Don't you have bigger problems? Which is a funny thing to say because, according to white privilege, no, the bigger problems don't exist. Didoing is foundational to the privileged mindset because it's one scenario where they will admit to the didoee, yes, I do have power over you, and you should just let me have it. Say for the sake of argument, you're watching a political debate on TV. The conservative candidate has used their opening arguments to dump a truckload of dubious claims on their opponent. Now you recognize this maneuver. That's the Gish Gallop. The debater makes point after dubious point, and if the other debater doesn't rebut every single one, they will appear to have lost the argument. These points don't have to be good or hard to disprove, there just has to be a lot of them.
Spam.
Oh, but what's this? The liberal candidate seems to have come prepared. That's new. They succinctly and efficiently dismantle each of their opponent's arguments, offering a clear rebuttal to every single one. It's obviously not the first time they've heard this particular gallop. So the conservatives' petard has just fully hoisted them. They've lost their own game and have to go on the defensive. Right? Turns out, no. The conservative points to a minor error. Maybe the liberal said their program would cost $40 million, but is actually estimated to cost $43, and treats them as an ignorant sap who can't even count correctly. That is now the subject. Everything else has been forgotten, and the liberal is backpedaling. Wait, you exclaim. How does that work? The liberal has to rebut each and every point, but the conservative takes issue with one and stays in the driver's seat? Are audiences fooled by this? Are liberals that easily snookered? The answer may shock you. You've just borne witness to the reverse Gish Gallop, where an entire argument falls apart if any of it can be disputed. These disputes, again, don't have to be good. They just have to call the airtightness of the argument into question. So a good example of this is how conservatives obsess over gaffes, which, fucking, really? Guys? Some Democrat will be all, conservatives want to shut down post offices as a form of vote suppression. They're pushing voter ID laws, and the post office is where many people get their IDs, and we are relying more and more heavily on mail-in voting. They overwhelmingly try to shut down offices in Black and Latine neighborhoods. Also, a lot of services like healthcare and courts still use physical mail by default, and there can be serious consequences to getting it late. Many elderly people still don't use email, and hey, Maybe some of them like getting junk mail. Up. That's it. That's your whole life now. For the rest of your career, you're the asshole who said old people like junk mail. You see, your mistake was assuming that dishonest people abide by the same rules they impose on everyone else. When I was a teenager, some friends of the family would invite me along when they asked my parents to dinner because I would play with their 5-year-old and let the grown-ups chat in peace. And he'd make up games where we'd bat a balloon back and forth or whatever and change the rules on the fly when it suited him, because the rule wasn't actually you can only touch the balloon once per turn. The rule was Andrew wins. The purpose of a Gish Gallop is to establish a narrative, not through argument or logic, but force and volume. Once established, it takes a lot less effort for them to maintain than for you to establish a new one. If they shake confidence in your argument, the audience will often revert to the previous argument, whether or not that one was ever proven. It's not about which story is true. It's about who sets the parameters for all stories going forward. Who got there first? This is not a debate. This is a Zerg rush. Understand that a dishonest
Gute Nacht, Leute.